Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining us for today's webinar, which will focus on the purpose of accreditation, where we will take you through what accreditation is, who UKAS is as an organisation, and my colleague Louise will also take you through the whole process. I'll hand you over to Louise in a second. Louise is our Head of Development and Scheme Integrity. She's been with UKAS for a number of years and is very well placed to give an excellent grounding in purpose and the value of accreditation and all the things that UKAS gets up to. As you can see from the notes on screen, we won't be enabling microphones during the webinar, but there will be a Q&A session at the end, in which we do invite you to put forward questions. So please submit them to the Q&A section as opposed to the chat section at the bottom, as that will allow us to keep on top of things, to collate our answers, and we will be providing them afterwards. The webinar is being recorded, and we will be sending a recording of the webinar around to participants next week. As you probably know, this is just one in a series of webinars that UKAS do. And with the recording, I will also send you sign-up links in case you wish to attend any of the others in this popular series. So with that, I will hand you over to Louise Sanders, who will be taking the webinar today. Louise can introduce herself and give you a bit of background of what she's been doing with UKAS, and then we'll take you forward for the webinar. Thank you very much.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Laura, and welcome everybody. My name is Louise Sanders. As Laura's just said, I'm Head of Development and Scheme Integrity here at UKAS. So I've been with UKAS for 19 years now, so funny how these things creep up on you, but 19 years have flown by very quickly. I started off as an assessment manager looking at agriculture, food, bioscience laboratories and inspection bodies all across the world, and focusing generally in the UK. And then I moved into the development section of UKAS some years ago, where we look after establishing accreditation, developing and establishing accreditation in areas where it's not yet present. So that might come at the request of governments or industry or individual organisations, and we work with those organisations and bodies, whoever they are, to establish that accreditation, to understand what the need is, understand what needs to be delivered, and then work to do that and ensure that our processes are back up that activity to make sure that we can provide robust, consistent, reliable accreditation. So that's myself. Just to run through today's webinar, the aim is to provide information from UKAS that will help you to understand why accreditation exists and how an organisation may go about obtaining that accreditation. This information may be of interest to people who are employed by an accredited organisation, but not necessarily directly involved in the accreditation process itself. And therefore, this should provide a bit of background for you, that background information about what accreditation means and why it's so important. As Laura said, if you do have any questions, then please do pop them in the Q&A function. We'll come to those at the end. So Laura's going to manage those, and we'll go through them. We have some time scheduled at the end of this webinar to go through those questions. Laura will be collating any similar ones and looking at those, and we'll go through those at the end. So if there's anything you want to ask further information on, please do pop them into a question for us, and we'll come to them as soon as we can. So the contents, as we've said, the purpose of today's webinar is to help you understand what accreditation is and to help you get started on the first steps in your accreditation journey. So we're going to talk a little bit about UKAS, who we are, our background, where we've come from, how we've evolved, where we sit now. Of course, we're going to talk about what accreditation is. It's a term that's bandied around in multiple ways with multiple meanings, and we have a very specific meaning and definition of accreditation as the national accreditation body. So we'll be taking you through that as well. We'll talk about the value and the benefits of accreditation and what that can deliver, not only to the wider public, but to government, to regulators, to organisations as well. And then towards the second half of the webinar, we'll look at the assessment process itself. So how do we assess organisations? What are the different stages through that process? And how does one link to the other? And then finally, we'll also take you through the application process. So being UKAS, you can imagine we like lots of forms. So there are a number of forms for applications, and I'll just take you through that process just to give you a little bit of an overview of that process so you can see what needs to be considered and how you might go about that should you wish to and decide the time has come. But let's get cracking. First of all, a little bit about UKAS. So what is UKAS? We're the sole national accreditation body for the United Kingdom. We work certainly within the United Kingdom, but that doesn't prevent us from working overseas. Indeed, we do a lot of overseas accreditation, deliver our accreditation overseas for organisation that might be working closely with the UK, or where it's important that we support our other accreditation colleagues throughout the world. So although we're not part of government, we're not civil servants, we're not part of government at all, it's very important that we remain independent, and that's part of our role. Accreditation is deemed as a public authority activity. UKAS works in the public interest, and we are appointed by government to be the national accreditation for the United Kingdom. So we're recognised and we're appointed by government with a memorandum of understanding, and we assess organisations that provide services for certification or testing or inspection, calibration and validation and verification activities, as well as some others. We were founded back in 1966, so some time ago now, and UKAS was created as it merged from NAMAS, which was the National Measurement Accreditation Service, and the NACCB, which was the National Accreditation for Certification Bodies, and that happened in 1995. Before that, NAMAS itself was the result of another merging. So that was between NatLAS, which was the National Testing Laboratory Accreditation Scheme, and BCS, which was the British Calibration Service. And in fact, the BCS, the calibration service, is where it all started, with 3 gentlemen in a porter cabin in a car park back in 1966. So we've come a long way since then. UKAS is a private and not-for-profit organisation. We have well over 2,600 accredited conformity assessment bodies as our customers. In an average year, we can expect to deliver somewhere between 35,000 assessment days, and this figure increases all the time as our customers develop their scopes of accreditation, and as we get new customers coming to us for that accreditation process. To date, UKAS has approximately 330 full-time employees, many of which are our remote working technical teams. Additionally, we have access to well over 700 independent technical assessors and experts. The network of these independent assessors and experts is hugely important to UKAS, and allows us to deliver suitably robust assessments in a wide range of technical areas. So we can supply the expertise in accreditation, and we look to our colleagues, our technical colleagues, to look to supply the technical expertise in each individual area, so that we can, as a team, ensure that we can provide those robust, realistic, reliable and value-adding assessments. We're currently recruiting for both full-time assessment managers and independent technical assessors, and all of our vacancies are available, and you can see them there in our careers section of the UKAS website. As part of the public authority activity, UKAS has been provided with the privilege and the remit to undertake its national accreditation body status. This operates under memorandum of understanding. Oh, jumped on a bit quick there. Let me go back a little bit for you. and it operates under a memorandum of understanding, as I've just mentioned, and that's with government. So government appoint us as the national accreditation body, and currently that's with the Department of Business and Trade. Does tend to move sometimes, but at the minute and for quite a little while now, we have been with Department of Business and Trade. So this slide provides an illustration of the breadth and the variety of the government departments and other stakeholders, such as associations, professional bodies that UKAS works with. And this is all in order to develop and deliver a robust accreditation service that adequately represents the growing and developing interests of the nation. To ensure that UKAS delivers an effective, technically competent and professional service, we have to make sure, and we need to ensure, that our stakeholder views, their concerns, their future priorities, their understanding of each of their sectors and how we can help underpin the trust and the confidence within those are fed into our strategic planning processes. And we have several mechanisms. So we have a policy advisory forum and a policy advisory council, as well as numerous technical advisory committees, which we're lucky enough to have to support us. So if we have a query in a particular technical area, we can go to our advisory committees and ask their opinion on what is suitable and what we should be looking for. So they're vital to the work that we continue to provide. So all of this is supported by work with policymakers in government departments, with agencies and regulators, and this explores how UKAS accreditation can be used to support the application of better risk-based, outcome-focused policies. This is delivered through the policy advisory structure of the forums and the councils. But as we said, there are also many steering groups which ensure that we have effective and efficient delivery of accreditation. One of the examples we have is in the healthcare sector. We have a steering group that's looking at the fourth industrial revolution and how that will affect the delivery of healthcare services. So moving on, what is accreditation and how does UKAS fit into the accreditation process? So I'm now going to take you through a definition of accreditation. And as I said before, there are multiple uses of this word, and we have, as the national accreditation body, a very specific definition for it. So accreditation is the attestation and formal recognition by an accreditation body of the competency, the impartiality, and the integrity of a conformity assessment body. And we assess them in how they perform a specific task or an activity to a relevant standard. So a conformity assessment body, that's a generic term that could be, for example, a certification body. It might be a laboratory or a testing or calibration laboratory. It might be a proficiency testing provider or an inspection body. So these are the people that we work with in order to provide that link and that demonstration of competency, impartiality, and integrity. Specific standards are used for the purpose of accreditation, and this assesses the applicant's conformity assessment body's processes against the requirements of this standard. So this is further broken down to activities such as a specific test or a type of inspection. So you can see here we were, as you can imagine, very, very busy during the COVID pandemic, doing an awful lot of work on the testing of COVID antigen tests, on the sampling of those tests and what that looked like. Inspection, we do an awful lot around lifts, passenger lifts, a lot around engineering and those kind of things. And then certification, it might be of a management system such as 9001, or it might be personnel certification, or a product that's being certified that we then back up and it becomes accredited certification. Or it might indeed be verification and validation. This is the newest standard that we're now working with, 17024, 29, and it's heavily being used in the sustainability processes, energy, net zero. So we're seeing a lot of use of it in this area. So moving on, the chain of accreditation. So UKAS has a remit to provide a world of confidence in the products and the services that the public rely upon. Accreditation also helps to facilitate national and international trade in a way that gives confidence and trust and assurance to the consumers, which ultimately use the products and the services that are subject to the accreditation that we provide worldwide. UKAS delivers this assurance through a chain of assurance, initially through the demonstration of its national accreditation body status, and this is through a peer review and evaluation against the standard that we need to meet, which is 17011, the standard that all international and national accreditation bodies must meet. UKAS then accredits UKAS then delivers assurance, assesses the performance and capabilities and the technical competence of those bodies that provide services and products. And that's to determine the organisational competency and their conformance with an agreed standard. This may include how they meet regulatory, sector-specific and scheme requirements. And then lastly, this provides a layer of confidence that these accredited organisations, that they meet the expectations to support the trust and the assurance of those products and services delivered to the public and the relevant stakeholders and interested parties within that sector. So this slide shows the symbols of accreditation, which are the marks that our accredited organisations can display to signify that they have been granted accreditation and that continue to have it. This also provides an illustration of the way and the wide variety of accredited activities that are available to serve many different industries and sectors. And you can see here we've got testing, we've got medical testing, we've got calibrations, certifications, we've got proficiency, we've also got a new one up there that we're looking forward to using, which is a biobanking accreditation, so accrediting biobanks using a newer standard. So that's another one that's coming, that's on its way. So a very exciting time for us as we develop that accreditation as well. The sectors that UKAS accredits is ever evolving. And at the moment, my team at the development team have over 50 new accreditation projects going through our development process. We have around 30 or 40 leads and inquiries each month where people are asking if their activities might be suitable for accreditation. So it's an ever evolving, ever widening process, and we certainly keep busy within our sector. Whilst the terms accreditation and certification are often used interchangeably, they are two closely related but very distinctly different steps on the quality assurance ladder. So accreditation performs an oversight role that underpins the quality, the impartiality and the competency of a certification or a testing laboratory or an inspection body, a validation and verification body, and the processes that they then deliver. Whereas certification is an audit of whether an organisation, a product, an individual, a service conforms to criteria that have been laid out in a recognised standard or scheme. So that might be 9001, for example, a quality management system. So we can see different words being used there. We've got confirmation of conformity for certification bodies, whereas accreditation is all of that, including impartiality, quality, and competency. So do different layers within that process. A certification body will be auditing the process and the systems of organisations who wish to gain accreditation, whereas UKAS and other accreditation bodies across the world will check the checkers. So we'll check what they're doing to make sure they meet requirements in order to be able to provide the processes and the assurance that they deliver. So that ensures that the CBs, the certification bodies, the inspection bodies, the other testing laboratories are meeting their accreditation criteria and are providing services that can be relied upon, that are robust, that are as well as being reliable, that they're consistent, and that they're robust. Testing laboratories also work and check that the output is actually technically correct. So we'll be looking to check the technical competency of laboratories, that they remain impartial, that their testing and their validation of methods and processes remains fit for purpose and remains correct and realistic and up to date, which is, as you can imagine, is vitally important. Moving on then, we're going to talk a little bit now about the values of accreditation and what accreditation can offer you and offer your organisations and the people who use those services that you then offer. So many businesses and organisations, such as government departments or other public sector bodies, use accreditation status as a selection criteria when evaluating external services and suppliers. And we're seeing this become more and more common and more widespread across lots of different sectors. Therefore, accreditation can offer you a competitive edge when being chosen or when you're tendering for a new contract or a piece of work. Various schemes, sectors, and industries may even have mandatory requirements for accreditation. So without holding accreditation, some organisations may find that they're unable to provide or deliver a key service in the UK or indeed the wider market. So some examples of this. Forensic services within the UK need to be accredited either to 17020, which is the inspection body standard, and that's used for scenes of crime and the examination of them, or something like 17025, which is a testing standard that looks at fingerprint comparisons, finger mark enhancements, body fluid recovery, DNA analysis, toxicology, firearms examinations, just to name but a few. And these are reviewed against the Forensic Science Regulators Code of Practice, which we also look at when we're assessing. Then we've also got the control of asbestos. This is covered by some regulations from 2012 that state that organisations performing this work need to be accredited against 17025 and reviewed against an approval code of practice, and some guidance as well that is provided externally from UKAS. Screening services for healthcare, such as infectious diseases in pregnancy, must be accredited as part of government governance requirements. And accreditation is a measure of the quality in the delivery of that service. And this will demonstrate the organisation's commitment to all of its stakeholders, including its staff, that it focuses on the best outcomes, best practice, and improvements in that service, and that it's committed to doing that. During the accreditation process, through the assessment, a conformity assessment body must demonstrate sufficient ability to evaluate and manage risks that may affect its activities. And this can then support an organisation's assurance for this, for its customers and clients going through that dynamic management of risk, and they know what's out there and they're managing any concerns, any risks or opportunities that may occur. Based on a survey of UKAS customers and our stakeholders, there was a heavy majority of responders that stated that accreditation provided confidence in its service delivery, that it improved the quality and the validity of the work that they were able to deliver. It differentiated its services from others, and it provided a procurement advantage over the likes for competitors. So significant benefits there. So UKAS provides organisations with knowledge to enhance efficiency and validation and validity of processes. Assessments for the purpose of accreditation can create assurance in the accuracy of those measurements, and the development of new types of accreditation support innovations through the provision of assessment services in new growth areas. Equally, conformity assessment bodies can demonstrate technical competency through these reviews and direct observations of their activities during our assessments. Accreditation also assures impartiality processes are in place by the fact that we are independent, we remain independent, and our third-party assessments are that independent check on your impartiality as well as competency and those other things as well. Once accreditation has been granted, organisations will be listed in the UKAS accreditation list on our website, and this is a verifiable process that means that for management systems you will be able to go in and check that the certificates produced by organisations have been underpinned by accreditation as required. Global acceptance of the UKAS symbols of accreditation through mutual recognition agreements across the international conformity assessment community facilitates and removes technical barriers to international trade, which is extremely important. From the air that you breathe to the food that you eat and the products you buy and the hospitals that you use, UKAS has, albeit a largely invisible part to play, but our aim is that everything that should be underpinned by accreditation actually is. Mutual recognition, so I touched on it in the last slide, but this is a very important part of our global visibility and our global standing across the world. So accreditation is part of an international network that aims to ensure equivalence and acceptance of results or processes across the globe with the aim of removing technical barriers to trade. So the ethos behind this is that it can be tested or inspected or certified once, but is accepted across that whole community. So we have two different sorts of mutual recognition agreements, which we call MRAs. One is a technical recognition between accreditation bodies with the purpose that the multilateral agreements that we have within these recognition agreements is to allow accredited conformity assessment of signatories to be recognised by other members. So that means that the acceptance of products and services across national borders and is based on a peer review process and continued surveillance to the standard that we need to meet, which, as I mentioned before, is 17011. All signatories must be declared competent to that standard and compliant to 17011. EEA members, so that's the European Community for Accreditation, all of those members must also be compliant with the principles of an EU accreditation regulation. Now, since we've left the EU, these regulations and their requirements are now reflected in UK British law. The second one is a bilateral agreement between states. So the objective here is to promote trade in goods between nations by facilitating a market access, the aim of which is to benefit industry by providing easier access to conformity assessment and that recognition of the benefits and the confidence and the trust that that then delivers. Mentioned some of these already, but just to go over them, sorry, we do talk in riddles a lot of the time. So just to define these, UKAS is the United Kingdom's member for the International Accreditation Forum, the IAF, We're also members of the International Laboratory Accreditation Corporation, so that's known as ILAC. And then lastly on this slide, we have the EA, which is the European Cooperation for Accreditation, and we still sit very firmly within that organisation. Despite the fact that we have left the EU, we are still part of the EA, most definitely. Okay, I'm going to now talk a little bit about the assessment process over the next few slides. So we're going to outline the key parts of the assessment process itself. What does this entail? What does it look like? And how do we go about it? So first, for preparation, UKAS expects that potential applicants will have implemented an active management system with demonstration of the following evidence, including but not limited to some internal audits. So you'll have started a process for that. You'll have something in place to handle and manage your complaints if you receive any, and also any non-conforming work. You will need to have an effective implementation of the corrective and preventive actions that might come out of those complaints or those non-conforming work incidents. You need to have active engagement with users, with customers and clients, and objective demonstration of how you handle feedback and the outcomes of that. Now, there might be other aspects as required by relevant standards that you will apply for, and any scheme frameworks frameworks that you might need to adhere to. So we would expect you to have a level of awareness of those elements, the additional requirements that might sit alongside or on top of the requirements for the standards that are used for accreditation purposes. Some signposting to these publications will have been outlined. That's all included within the application process that I'll come to in a moment. Applicants also need to have addressed the technical requirements. So we need to think about the competency of your staff. How have you done that? How have you validated or verified the methods that you're going to be using? So particularly for testing laboratories. How have you, if you're an inspection or a certification body, how do you know that the schemes that you're going to be using are actually fit for purpose and eligible for accreditation purposes? So all of that needs to be considered, and we can assist with that in terms of signposting you to the right things. Clearly, we can't consult, we need to remain independent, but we'll also always support and help you as far as we can. Now, the pre-assessment follows once you've prepared. So once you've done all that preparation, your application is then accepted by UKAS. You'll be assigned a dedicated assessment manager who we usually call an AM. Now, this is your point of focus at UKAS. This is the person you're going to get to know very well over the coming years. And this is the person who'll provide support to you, will guide you through the accreditation process, and will manage all of your assessments moving forward. As part of this process, the assessment manager will propose an optional pre-assessment process. Now, this is highly recommended, and we do know that we usually see that people who do go down the pre-assessment route do find the rest of the process a little bit smoother, because we've started that process a little bit earlier. But it's up to you. It's not mandatory, although it is highly recommended, especially if you're new to accreditation, and you might need a little bit more guidance in checking what you've done is on the right road and you're in the right place. Now, those pre-assessments in most cases will involve some on-site assessment activity where we'll come and visit you. This might be a combination of a document review ahead of that assessment, and then some review of your activities on site, getting to know you, getting to know your facilities, your processes, and meeting your staff, and just sort of creating that relationship. So pre-assessments are a great way to highlight areas of conformance and outline any gaps to allow you to iron out any potential problems before we move on to the next stage, which is that initial assessment. Just as importantly, it will help you understand the accreditation process, what to expect on your initial assessment. And at this stage, with we begin to develop that accreditation relationship with you, so that your staff know us, they become comfortable with us being around and us asking questions and understanding your businesses, your activities, and also for our staff to get to know you as well. Now, a pre-assessment wouldn't raise any formal findings as such, but we do provide you with a report, so an overview of your systems, and we will always outline any weaknesses and, of course, any strengths that we see, so that you will know what needs to be worked on and actually what's ready to go. Moving on then to the initial assessments. So this is the formal assessments. This can take several days with you on site, and that will be dependent on the scope that you are applying for. We will need to witness all of the activities that you are proposing and you have applied for, that you're proposing will go onto your schedule of accreditation. So if that's in laboratories, we'll be looking and witnessing those tests in laboratories. If it's an inspection, we'll be coming out with you on those inspection activities to see how the process is used. And for certification and others, we will be doing the same in accompanying you on those audits to see how those processes are delivered, how you go about that process, how you gather and verify information for your customers. So we'll need to see all of that. We will also need to see your technical competency, how you've deemed competency for your staff, what are the criteria, what is your training matrices, what are your records looking like for all of that. We'll also need to see your facilities to ensure that they're fit for purpose, particularly for laboratories, as you can imagine. If those laboratories need to have a certain containment level or certain anti-contamination issues, then we'll be assessing those with you. And we'll always look at your quality management system to look at how you've developed that, how you've implemented it, that it's live, that it's well embedded, that your staff are aware of it, that it's actually being used and it's sort of day-to-day normal, or certainly getting towards it. So it's a big assessment where we would always, again, write a report afterwards. And if there are any areas where you don't quite meet requirements, then we can raise what we call an improvement action. So that's where we're saying there's a gap here. You're going to need to rectify this in order to be fully compliant. So we would leave that with you, agree an improvement action, and generally you have 3 months to address those, get some evidence back into us, which we will review and decide how we're going to move forward, whether we accept it or whether there's some more work to do as well. The important thing after all of that, and that part of that assessment, is we'll also make a recommendation on your grant of accreditation. So if all's gone well, you have some findings to clear, that's absolutely fine. If we believe that that's possible and you're going to do that and we've talked it through with you, then we will be able to make a positive recommendation for your accreditation. That then moves to independent decision makers behind the scenes, so somebody who hasn't been involved in any of the assessment process, and that's for us to check our processes have been implemented, that we've gone through everything we needed to do, we followed our processes, we use competent staff, we got all of the information that we need in order to confirm that grant of accreditation should move forward. So that's the initial assessment. Moving into the grant of accreditation. So before we do that, obviously you need to clear those findings, but we will also send you a draft copy of your schedule of accreditation. So this will be an estimate, or we will include an estimate of the assessment days going forward, just so that you know the kind of effort that we'll need to work with you to assess you on an ongoing basis, to be able to demonstrate that your accreditation is still valid and it is actually therefore maintained across what we call a 4-year cycle. To continue with your grants, you'll need to review and approve your draft schedule and return it back to us. And if required, if there's any fees that are outstanding, then those, of course, would need to be paid. Once all of the documentation has been received, the recommendations are accepted, and all of those clear findings, if we've raised them, have been accepted, then the decision maker, that independent person, will be able to grant your accreditation, and your 4-year cycle will commence. So that's the great day. That's the day we all get really excited about, and we all look forward to, yourselves and very much us as well. We really enjoy it when we can see all that hard work paying off. At that point, you'll receive a grant of accreditation letter, and a verifiable accreditation e-certificate, which can be scanned by any client to provide them with confidence of your accreditation, and also protects your accreditation status. A schedule of accreditation is listed then onto our website. Now, this details all of the things that you're accredited for, the activities, so whether it's testing, whether it's certification, inspection, if it's testing, for example, which methods, what sample types are you going to be accredited against, and which methods are you accredited for. For certification, it will be what are you certifying, and what schemes or what standards are you using for the basis of that certification or indeed inspection. You will also receive relevant symbols along with instructions for their use. Now, the UKAS symbol, as you've seen, contains the crown. It's not our symbol. It's licensed to us by government, and the rules for it are listed in a government document which you can find on our website. The document contains information on the size of the symbol, the color, excuse me, its use. For example, it's not to be placed on a flag or a vehicle, and wherever it's used, it must be used in a way that does not mislead the reader. So particularly there, we're thinking that it wouldn't be placed on something that is not accredited. So on a web page which details activities for which you are not accredited would not be allowed, but you could put it on anything where the activities are that are being referred to are accredited. And then we're going to move on to the ongoing assessment. So as they say, that's not the end of the process, but actually the beginning. And on an annual basis, we'll perform what we call a surveillance activity. So this will involve the assessment of your whole system, including your management systems and your technical activities. For labs, this might be witnessing of performance of some of the testing activities. And for CBs or inspection bodies, this would involve witnessing of those activities. Surveillance activities are reported in an assessment report, and any further gaps are noted, and mandatory findings or recommended findings, which we call improvement actions, are raised as necessary. And when all of that is complete, then your accreditation is duly maintained for another year until your next assessment. So I'm going to very briefly just go through this. This slide talks us through the whole process that we've been just discussing. So we've got the application on the left-hand side, moving over to the right-hand side. We start off with you applying for accreditation. We will review that application. We'll decide whether you want a pre-assessment, which staff we're going to need, how we're going to assess it, do we need to come on site, do we need to witness, or what do we need to witness? And we'll perform that pre-assessment activity as well. Then we move to the initial assessment, where we'll have an opening meeting, a closing meeting to deliver our recommendation. We'll interview staff, we'll witness activities. You'll get a full report and recommendation at the end of that. Then we have that decision-making independent process towards between the initial assessment and the grant of accreditation. And then on the very right-hand side there, we have the 4-year cycle, which you can see moves through year 1, year 2, year 3, and year 4. In year 4, we perform what we call a reassessment. So that's when we'll renew your accreditation. So another in-depth assessment, whereas the surveillance activities can be a little bit more flexible. applying for accreditation. So how do you get all of this started? Well, first of all, you must have a copy of the relevant standards to familiarise yourself with the requirements, so you know what's coming, what you need to adhere to, and these can be purchased from sources such as BSI or from ISO. Some of the standards are freely available, and you can get those via our website, but the majority, I'm afraid, you would have to purchase. You'll need to have undertaken a gap analysis on the current provision of your service against the standard you wish to apply for. So is there anything that you're missing, or actually if you met all the requirements? And that's a really good sort of ready reckoner for where you are and if you've got further work to do. So that really should help. The UKAS website has links to various mandatory publications, such as technical policy statements that need to be designed into your system to ensure your conformance and your compliance. And that's depending on your type of service. There may be further actions, further information and things that you need to look at. So we would always discuss that with you as to what's relevant for you and what you actually need to cover. International or publications, so there may be some European ones, there may be International Accreditation Forum, the IAF, or the ILSC. And once you've got those and you're ready to those, then we can move on to the next stage, which is its application form time. So as I already mentioned, there are a number of forms, and your assessment manager will be helping to take you through that. And you know, we will do that to make sure that we have all of the information that we need. In terms of business, we need this signed agreement from you to confirm your adherence to terms of business and our agreement. And this allows us to then process the next stage, which is we'll check all of those application forms. We'll check your financial situation and some finance checks to before we move on then. And your AM will then talk to you about your application and how we move forward and see what happens. And it's also then a perfect opportunity for you to raise questions on the assessment process to support your preparation and discussion about the pre-assessment process. Okay. Any questions? So we'll now move on to our Q&A session. So please raise any further questions you have in the chat. We've got a good 10 minutes for this, so we'll talk quickly. But everything discussed and any queries that don't get addressed in this session, we can transcribe into FAQs and allow you to see that after the webinar.
Great, thanks, Louise. And we have had some questions actually come through. If you've got questions, please could you put them in the Q&A rather than raise hands, because we won't be enabling microphones in this session. Somebody has asked, what are the stages between AC6 submission and assessment visit?
Okay, so very much we would be reviewing those documents. So your application, see the scope. We would discuss with you your readiness to proceed. So are you up and running, or are you thinking this might be a 6 months work, and how ready are you to proceed? We would be asking you for your quality manual, for some of your technical documentation, depending on the scope that you're applying for, so that we can see that with AC6, so with medical laboratories, that you've validated your methods, that you've got competency processes in place for your staff, and those are the discussions that your AM would have with you. And all of that is just to try and map, are you ready to move forward? Do you want a pre-assessment? When should we do that? And we would be reviewing documentation and making sure that you're in the right place to move forward. We're certainly not in the business of performing pre-assessments or any assessments if you're not ready, as we grant you accreditation. So we'll be working with you to make sure that we have the best use of your time and your money to do that. So that's the next process.
We've also had a couple of questions that relate to sort of extensions to scope. Somebody has asked, how long does it take for your scope to be updated once your findings are cleared?
Okay, so I'm going to say the UKAS, it depends, and it will depend on the status underneath. So we do this two-stage decision process. So when we come back from visits, we will put that in, all of the documentation in for what we call a provisional decision. If there are any questions on that we would need to come back to you, we would need to do that and resolve any of those before we can move on to the final. If there aren't any of those and you clear your findings, then it literally is next step into talking with the decision maker to review those actions, check everything's in place and actually get that process delivered. Now, timing wise, it will depend on the queue situation, how many we have in that queue, but really it shouldn't be more than a week or two. And certainly if you're in a position where you need it for a contract or anything, please let your assessment manager know so that we can prioritize any grants. We treat them all extremely, extremely seriously and put them through as quickly as we can. But if there's anything we need to know, please do let us know.
And someone else regarding extensions to scope or changes to scope, they have asked, is there an additional cost for adding or removing something from the scope of accreditation?
Yeah, there's no cost for removing a test or an activity from your schedule. We would need to verify that up until you kept that asked for that removal, that you had kept up to date with what's going, but we would look at that on a surveillance activity. In terms of adding, then yes, there would be a cost, but that will vary depending on what you've already got on scope. Is it more of the same? Is it using this for a laboratory, say? Is it the same equipment, the same staff, just a slightly different analyte, for example, or a matrix, where we might be able to do that by a remote assessment, looking at your validation data? If it's brand new equipment and a brand new a determinant, then we may need to come on site and witness that. So it will vary on a case-by-case basis, and also what on you have already on scope. For inspection bodies or certification bodies, it would also vary in the same way. If it's another scheme that is very similar to other schemes you have the same processes and the same staff and the same competency criteria, perhaps some additional or different requirements that you're looking at, then we would look at that and see what we would need to assess to have confidence in how that's managed. But it would vary and there would be a cost, but it could be that it's half a day or a day's remote assessment, or it could be several days on site with you.
And I'm assuming, Louise, if you're already accredited and you're looking for that extension to scope, the best thing to do would be to speak to your AM and explain exactly what you're looking for, and they'll probably be able to give you a bit more of a ballpark figure.
Absolutely. They're the people that will collect that information and make those decisions with you on, okay, we can do this remotely, and we can do it, in a month's time or next week or whatever. Or yes, we're going to need to come and see you on site. But yeah, your assessment manager is your focal point at UKAS, is the person who knows you best, knows your scope of accreditation, and will work with you through that process.
We've had some interesting questions here. Someone's asked who can perform an initial gap analysis. I'm assuming they mean within their business if they're considering accreditation. So I suppose what they're looking for is perhaps recommendations as to who would be well placed to do such a thing.
And I think that's the answer, really. Is it somebody who has that oversight of the organisation itself? So we often see it as somebody such as a director, perhaps, or a quality manager, a senior manager, but it needs to be somebody who knows the is in a position where they can see all of the processes that go on within the organisation, and can say, yeah, we've got this. It's not called that, but we do this, and that will meet requirements. And we certainly don't want anyone reinventing wheels that you've already got, but it's about understanding what those wheels are. So there is no requirement for it to be a certain person or a certain level of staff member within organisation, but I would say it needs to be somebody who has that overview, and that will change. We have some very, very small organisations, and we have multinational massive organisations, so it will be very different in each organisation.
We've got a couple more questions relating to gap analysis, actually. Somebody's asked, how do I apply for initial gap analysis to be performed in relation to ISO 17025 accreditation?
Okay.
It's probably worth mentioning the readiness assessment tools at this stage, I guess, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is for you to perform the gap analysis. We'd like you to do that against, get yourself a copy of 17025 is obviously most important, and then go through that along with your processes and do your own gap analysis. Most people tend to do them as an Excel spreadsheet, put all the requirements down one side, and then log what they've got that meet them, or where they've got gaps, and do that. And as Laura said, for 17025, and there are others that are very close to being published as well.
15189 is now the readiness.
15189 is now processed.
available.
Yep. We're doing one for schemes as well for certification, that will be out by the end of the month. Now, these are tools that you can find on our website, which ask you some pertinent questions to get a feel for how ready you are to move forward. So if you please do, utilize those tools, and put your information in, and it will say, yep, you're ready to go, or yeah, you need to do a little bit more work here, and it will give you that information. So we're developing those very quickly, but the 17025 one has been up and running for quite some time now. So definitely have a look at that. That should really help.
We've got another question asking at what point people are able to sort of establish that they're ready for a gap analysis. Again, I'd probably point you in direction of the readiness assessment tools. I'm going to be sending out emails with copies of the recordings. I will put links to the readiness assessment tools. They are free. Free online self-assessment tools that you can carry out yourself in your own time, and that's probably a good first step for seeing how far away you are to the process of applying.
And I would say you can start as early as you like, because it's a work in progress, isn't it? I think it would be a good sort of work planner, as well as a gap analysis that says, this is what we've got, this is what we need to have, this is what we've got, these are our gaps, and you can start working towards them. If there's a lot of gaps at the beginning, that's fine, it's fair enough, isn't it? It will just allow you to identify where those gaps are and what you need to do it. And I think you might be pleasantly surprised in that you've got more than you think you have. Certainly in the management system side, people tend to have good frameworks for management systems. So don't be too hard on yourself when you're doing that. But I would start it earlier rather than later as a tool for yourselves, as you plan and manage your accreditation application. But yeah, there's lots of tools on the website, and please do contact us if you have any queries.
Louise, do you have time for a few more questions?
Certainly do.
Brilliant, thank you. They're reasonably straightforward. We've got one gentleman asking, how long does the accreditation last for?
Okay, so once you're accredited, it can last as long as you keep it up. So we accredit in 4-year cycles. There is no lapse between those. We plan it so that your accreditation doesn't expire, but we actually we renew it before that happens. So once you're accredited, as long as you keep up with your surveillance activities, you close any findings that you have successful surveillances and your reassessments every 4 years, then your accreditation can last you as long as you like.
We have someone has asked, how much evidence do you require? 6 months to 1 year's worth. I'm assuming that's for an initial accreditation.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, actually. We're not looking for you to have perfect, fully standard, fully fully standing processes that have, for example, within an internal audit program, we wouldn't be expecting you to have done a full cycle, but we would expect it to be started and for you to have evidence of how that works. So we'd be looking for a number of internal audits that you can show us, or some examples to see that it's in place. We'd expect that everybody had a training record and a competency record, any tests to be validated, your QC to be up and running. So it's not necessarily about timing and amounts worth, it's more the milestones, more the things to hang things on, rather than the amount of time. So if you've got evidence to show that you have systems that are up and running and implemented and active and part of daily life, then as long as we've got reasonable evidence to see that. So as I said, for the internal audits, a number of audits, not just one on complaints and you hadn't had any, so there wasn't much to audit. That's not going to give us much confidence in your process. But actually, if you can do some to show that you've audited areas and you can demonstrate how that works to us, and then that's what we'd be looking for. We're looking for your competency and the reliability and your impartiality and your technical management and your quality management system. So that's what we're looking for, not a specific time gap or time amount of evidence. It's a waffly answer, sorry.
No, that's great, thank you. We've got a transition question. When do the ISO 15189/2022 standards need to be implemented, as this person's currently accredited to 2012?
Okay, the way I understand it, there is a lot of information on this on our website, with the transition deadlines. The way we work with transitions is we have a period of time at the beginning where people can be assessed against either standard, and we would accept applications from new people, say, also from both versions of that standard. Now we're in this middle area where we're starting, and I have a feeling it's June this year that we're going to be saying we're only going to assess the new ones on onwards, so the 22 version. But
I've just found the timeline. There's actually a technical bulletin about timelines, which I will drop in this because that's got full information.
So that explains it all. So we do have a planned process that helps you to move through it. We are already doing transitions with people, so it's well underway. So yeah, that bulletin is the place to look for that. Thanks, Laura.
No problem. That in a second. Somebody's also asked, is there any difference between UKAS accreditation and ISO 17025 accreditation?
Okay, so we accredit, so we're the national accreditation body for the UK, and we use 17025 as the standard, which is an internationally used standard that is used by accreditation bodies to accredit an organisation against. So you can be accredited against 17025, but you would be accredited by us. So does that make sense? So the standard itself, you're not accredited by 17025, you're accredited to it, and we would do that assessment and assess you against the requirements of 17025.
Great, thank you. And someone's asked how long it should take between submitting an extension to scope and receiving an answer, so presumably requesting an extension to scope.
Yeah, we state that could be up to 3 months. All of our staff book 3 to 5 months ahead, so it's trying for them to try and fit it in and try and plan. Do we need an on-site? What does that look like? So that application will go into our application department, who will then process it and let the assessment manager know. If you hadn't copied them in, if you had, then obviously they'd know, and if you'd spoken to them about it, they would know as well. And they will work with you to say, how quickly do you need this? Do you want to do it at your next surveillance? Do you need it now? And have that that kind of conversation with you. But I think a ballpark is a good 3 months as a minimum. So if you have something that is, you know, very time dependent, please let us know sooner rather than later, so we can work with you to meet those requirements.
Lovely. And we've got another question here. In a full assessment visit of an accredited medical laboratory, are all of the laboratory tests assessed as opposed to just a selection of tests?
No, that's completely up to you to decide what the scope of accreditation is. I think it would be very unusual in any testing laboratory for all of the tests and activities to be accredited. Some of them will either be new or very kind of specialized testing that might be a decision made that it wasn't worth accrediting it because you're not going to use it very often. So it's absolutely up to you to define what that scope is, and we are only interested in assessing what you're asking us to assess and accredit. So that's up to you to decide that, and that can often be a changeable feat, in that you might, you know, one of those specialist activities or specialist testings, for example, might not be required for accreditation, and then suddenly it might be the in thing, and actually you want that level of assurance to demonstrate your competency and the compliance. So that's up to you, and that's again something you'd need to discuss with your AM. But absolutely no, you don't have to have unless you want everything accredited, of course, but you certainly don't have to. You just need to list what you do want accredited.
Okay, thank you very much. That does bring us to the end of the questions. Thank you for answering all those and for such a comprehensive, clear explanation of what we do and what the purpose of accreditation is. So I'm going to close the webinar at this point and once again say thank you very much, Louise, and thank you to everybody that attended and asked questions. And as I say, a copy of the recording will be going out next week. I will put links to the readiness assessment tools because I think they might be useful for some people, and also the slides. We've had a couple of questions which I've answered about things like logos and things like that.
Okay.
So also, if you have anything like that you'd like to know the answer to, the best thing you can do is email communications@ukas.com. And myself and my colleagues will certainly make sure that we filter those questions through to the right person if they're not something that we can answer ourselves. So we're always here anyway. So I will close. Thank you very much and have a good rest of the afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.